Movie Macro number 9. I am with Keith here. I'm smiling because the first take I mispronounced and just misspoke what the title was of the film that we're doing, which is Madeline's Madeline. It's a 2018 film by Josephine Decker. I believe it was filmed mostly through 2017 when the lead actress... Wait, now I forgot the name of the lead actress. What's her name?
Howard.
Yeah, Helena Howard. I believe she must have been 19 or so at the time. It's an interesting film, right? You told me about it, that you saw it on Criterion, and you were wondering if we could do a movie macro on it. And I saw it for the first time the last few days. And I would say that, first of all, I mean, in many kind of important respects, like technically it's very well done. There's plenty of scenes that I consider to be excellent scenes. It's kind of similar in the sense that when we did Liznitsa's Donbass film, also from 2018, there were a couple of scenes that I would argue are between very good to excellent, and the same applies here, except, you know, it's kind of like more sustained. Although there's also plenty of letdowns, like we're going to talk about, I guess, about the ending. I mean, we haven't talked about the film before, but I don't find the ending very strong. There was some kind of like ham-fisted symbolism, some ham-fisted imagery. Some of the negative reviews that I saw of the film seemed to be pretty wrong in terms of, like, you know, you could do a little bit of a negative critique here and there, but the specifics of what they were highlighting just was not appropriate. Like people would say things like, oh, you know, the director doesn't seem to understand that the audience doesn't care that much about artists and the artistic process compared to the actors and the directors themselves. And it's like
that is a persistent critique of this kind of, like, there's a whole thing about oh, I'm so tired of books and movies and poems about writers, you know, it's so self-indulgent. And it's like, you know, there's all these conflicting messages because you also get write what you know, stay in your lane kind of stuff. It's like, okay, so like, but people clearly like find this stuff interesting, you know, like there's plenty of famous works of art that are about an artist of one variety or another. So I think that's just a cop out to like not have to criticize something or to be lazy with your criticism. Like if you found the movie boring, like that can be the case, not because not because there is something inherently invalid about like watching the artistic process of a theater director or whatever, but maybe there's something with the movie that's a little bit flawed. I found this movie, actually my wife found this movie. We were just scrolling through the Criterion Channel and she was looking at the interesting feature of the Criterion Channel, which is like newer releases that they feature. They're not part of the Criterion collection proper. They're just a platform for smaller or less discussed films to get a streaming premiere somewhere. And I watched the trailer, and the trailer was nuts for this. Like the trailer features some really, really striking imagery, and it's striking in the movie too, actually. And the thing that stuck out to me the most is, as somebody that majored in acting, I took movement classes, they're called, in college. I took a class with the movement teacher on performing with a mask, like they have the pig masks in this movie. Like this is real shit. Like this is like just how these people are. This is like just how this particular sausage gets made. This like in terms of evoking a practice that is, I would hope, going to be like dead in 50 years or whatever, like this sort of very self-indulgent, like let's get into space and explore and we'll sort of figure out what it is by improvisationally rubbing up against each other and having people bark like dogs and pretend to be cats and shit. Like, in terms of like evoking just what is kind of the emotional and personal core of a lot of this stuff and a lot of these people, this film's dead fucking on it. Like I was really struck by the choice to situate it from the perspective of a mentally disturbed teenager as well. I think really allows the director to get at something about this that if it was filmed like somewhat more objectively, she wouldn't have really been able to do. I almost, the movie kind of reminds me like if John Cassavetes made Repulsion or something like that. It's got that sort of loose, mildly improvisational feel of a John Cassavetes movie, but it sort of goes more subjective than any particular John Cassavetes movie that I can think of, in the way that, like, in Repulsion, you don't necessarily know where the real world stops and the main character's delusions start setting in.
Well, one thing I'll ask you is, do you think that, because you're familiar with these kinds of classes and whatnot, and you and I would consider to be very silly and very self-indulgent, and most of the time not actually leading to anything of value. I mean, like, I don't even care about what the particular process is of a given artist, but given the fact that it seems to almost never lead to anything worthwhile, that seems to be the issue. So, like, when you see the self-indulgence, it's kind of like my mind immediately, goes to, like, well, of course the end product is going to be garbage. Look what they're doing here. But you and I could say that this is self-indulgent. But do you think that this is actually a critique that's being made at any point in the film, or is it just sort of treated in a neutral way? Is it taken at face value? Is there supposed to be a positive kind of vibe to it? Let's say, like, near the end, where there seems to be some sort of psychological shift and some kind of I guess forgiveness for everybody involved, as well as, like, perhaps, like, redemption for Evangeline is her name, the director of the director within the film, right? The troupe director. Maybe some sort of, like, process that she goes through where this unhealthy dynamic that she has with her actress is kind of, like, wiped clean. Like, do you think there's some sort of critique being made by the actual director of the film, Josephine Decker, or what?
Well, I mean, I certainly think so. I think we'll have words about the ending, because I actually I have a different interpretation of the ending, I think, than you. But I mean, throughout the movie, the director is shown as basically being just like vampiric almost. Like, she sees this kid in crisis, and instead of, like, pushing her away from this thing that is clearly, like, exacerbating something in her that she has probably had a hard time, like, getting control of in the first place, she keeps wanting to go deeper, to pull more and more and more of the trauma out of her. Like, act it out for me. Then what happened? Then what happened? You burn your mom's hand with an iron in your dream? Oh, isn't that interesting? Let's all do that. Like, this fucked up relationship that you have with your mother, let's have like 20 adults surround you and act it out to your face, and, like, break every part of your psyche into like physicalized pieces in the space, and just have you play around with it. I mean, I certainly think there is, like, an implicit criticism that this kind of, and I mean, this is really something that happens a lot in actor training in general, is this sort of, like, self-exploitation of your vulnerabilities and your insecurities and things like that. And some degree of that is necessary, like, in order for you to learn how to be vulnerable in front of people, to, like, touch something in yourself that people might find interesting. But a lot of it just it comes across as, like, people flailing at the fact that nobody really knows how to teach acting. Like, and it's really not something you exactly can teach. Like, you just have to do it. And if you're any good at it, then you will just kind of get better at doing it the more that you do it. I didn't get that much better at it, which is why I never pursued it after I graduated.
By critique, I meant the specific, like, process of this kind of dancing. Like, is that being critiqued, or when we call self-indulgent, is it just, like, our perspective, or do you think that's also the Josephine Decker's perspective?
I don't know if she has that perspective or not. I don't think that she would say that that's the question even that interests her about this. It's more like, let's just watch these people do this and see what it shows us, like, the fact that they're doing it. So there's almost like a anthropological kind of quality or whatever. Like, let's just watch it play out and see what happens. Kind of. I mean, based on what I read of Josephine Decker, this is kind of how she does a lot of her stuff, like, sort of doing these sort of loose improvisations and sort of finding the script. And so I would say that maybe there is, like, a little bit of self-reflection, or, like, a self-critique, maybe more so than anything. Like, I'm asking these people to pull out all of their the dark shit inside of them and put it in, on the camera for me so I can make a movie about it. And, maybe I'm Evangeline just a little bit, so, but I don't know if she would have, I don't know if the insight, like, oh, this whole process is basically, and she probably would say it's not bankrupt because I make my stuff like this, and like I'm giving you like the silliest and most self-indulgent version of what this is, so to kind of explore the essence of it a little bit more fully. Like I would say she might look at this particular kind of like theater, this like movement in space, gesticulating wildly, oh, kind of stuff. I would think that she might look at that and say, yeah, that probably is not going to go anywhere good. But I don't think like the whole idea of this sort of process is something that she would necessarily condemn, because from what I can tell, it's what she does.
Yeah, one thing that, well, first of all, I agree that specifically like the critique of, let's say, the art or the lack of art or whatever within is not really the point of the film. I agree it's much more kind of anthropological. I think one of the best decisions that she makes here as a director is, I mean, I could easily imagine, and I'm sure there's like films like that everywhere, where the imagery would be primarily like these very long takes of almost kind of like a Days of Heaven style stuff, like, oh, let's capture the movement, let's capture, and that would be like a very, very big chunk of the film. Here you get enough of it where what's going on, right? There's enough kind of imagery there's like enough like symbolism there or whatever, and you're not like being forced to like deal with it again and again and again in a very kind of extended fashion. And to the extent that you do see some of the dancing and some of the kind of like, for example, like when Regina comes in, the mother of the girl, when she comes in to do this kind of like her own kind of like, I guess, acting lesson, the way that the other actors are kind of imitating her, it has an interesting quality. It's clearly very well done. It's technically well done. Psychologically, it's almost as if like you're constantly on the cusp of, some kind of like break happening with all the kind of nervous energy. So I think, those elements are definitely well done. As to the question of like, well, does Josephine Decker do this thing herself in her own life? I remember like in her biography, I was reading something along the lines of she showed up in like 2010 to a performance by that, I forget what her name is, Mia Abramovic, the one that's kind of like
the Pizzagate lady, yeah.
Wait, Pizzagate, what is that?
You don't know about Pizzagate, the precursor to QAnon?
What does that have to do with her?
Well, that's because John Podesta has like dealings with Abramovich or whatever, and so like her weird like conceptual performance art and the vaguely satanic energy of it was like a part of why these like right-wing psychopaths thought that they were like doing child sacrifice in the basement of the pizza parlor that they would all go to all the time in Washington, D.C. Yeah.
So I mean, she showed up to this performance, and instead of like sitting down and staring at her like I guess most attendees do, she literally like took off all her clothes and had to be escorted out of, she had to be escorted out of it was MoMA. So she was forced out of MoMA because she got naked in front of this other woman, in front of like all the other spectators. And like it's one of those things where I can imagine in a film like this, like I haven't seen anything else from her, but I can imagine someone that if she doesn't really have that sort of core that she's cultivating, you could easily go in these kinds of very slipshod directions where everything is just kind of like filaments and little trails, but there's no actual core going on. But this film does have a core. It does have a narrative that makes sense. It's a narrative that's well written. I mean, it's well scripted for the most part. Like, I mean, like obviously the quality of the acting really makes it work as well. And I mean, there's this kind of dynamic interaction between the girl and her mother where, at the beginning it's like, all right, so she's acting out this, she's sort of like living this life of a cat, right? To try to really get into the character of a cat. And the mother seems to be like very, nervous, but also just kind of accommodating. And then in other scenes, it's kind of like it's almost like Whiplash, where suddenly she's very, very against the fact that she's going so hard into this acting, and maybe it's not really that good for her psychologically. But that only comes out a little bit later, so you don't exactly know what the reasons for the tension is until later on, right? She just seems to be like a concerned mother at the beginning. And to the extent that there's like overreactions on Regina's part, whether it's like she catches her and her friends watching, and that's one thing I want to talk about, the fucking goon cave. Like that's the one thing that I don't understand. Why is there a goon cave in this basement? Why is all that stuff there? It seems like her father seems to not really be in her life, or if he is, he's not really shown in the film. But there's like essentially, what we'd now call, like a goon cave, where it's just like porn all around the walls. It seems to be in pristine condition, weirdly enough, although I think it's a somewhat unfinished basement. You see some of the exposed walls going down the stairs, and her overreaction is like she catches them watching porn. She starts screaming, "Okay, we're gonna watch it. Sit down." And then she turns to some teenage boy like, "Okay, whip it out." So there's like things like that where she also does not have the healthiest relationship with her daughter, but for the most part, like it doesn't seem to be a truly toxic relationship. It doesn't seem to be abusive. To what extent is it mental ills on her daughter's part versus tons of like typical teenage sort of growing pains, and a mother that's not quite able to handle all of that. But like those elements were well done, and they slowly unfold. One thing I will say is that watching a second time, I didn't quite get the sense that you get a whole lot more from a second viewing.
That's absolutely true.
So like and that's one of the problems. Like one of the ways you could really tell, like if you're confused about like, okay, is this a bad movie, a solid movie, a good one, an excellent one, or a great one? By the time you get to like excellent to great, especially when you get to like great films, seeing it once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, you're always going to find something new. You're always going to find new layers. You're always going to notice something you didn't notice before. Here, with the exception of some of the chronology of events that I forget what scene it was, but like early on, like there's like a little detail that's like, oh yeah, that's going to come up later. With the exception of like fairly minor, almost like plot, elements like this, I didn't get a whole lot from the second viewing versus the first.
No, I completely agree with that. This is like a good one viewing movie, I would say, because most of the effect that it has to offer is just the sort of visceralness of it. Is just the sort of disorientation of the camera, and suddenly we're in fantasy and she's in a turtle costume swimming in the ocean, but it's like a shitty turtle costume made out of paper mache, so it looks cool, but it looks twisted. Like this is just really bizarre behavior that she's engaging in. Like, what is this? What's going on? It really does leave an impression. Like I mean, when I first saw it, I was like, damn, this is really good. Like I was not I kind of thought it would be bad almost, because I could, when it started, I was like, oh, it's about this like kind of like theater movement. Like there's totally a bad version of this movie, but I was completely surprised. But I rewatched it just so I could, speak intelligently about it, because I saw it weeks ago, remember kind of the order that stuff happened in, all the characters and stuff. And I got nothing additional. And in fact, it's probably like less good on a second watch, because you know what's coming and you can't ever have that first aesthetic impression again, that you have from it. So, it's like, like a good, like 75 out of 100 kind of movie, like 75, 78, somewhere in that range. Like there's nothing that it does particularly wrong, but it's not necessarily like super depthful either. And I think that's partially the script, because this wasn't scripted. That's the thing. This was like she'd put the actors in a car and say, okay, here's what you're both thinking about. Now just have this conversation. And I think she basically just edited it down to like the most salient lines that they sort of happened upon in the process. That's why I say she is herself kind of an Evangeline in the way that she makes her art, just hopefully not as vampiric and not as delusional about what it is that she's actually doing. but ultimately there's not like hidden layers to what people are saying to each other. There's not hidden depths to the dialogue. You don't really learn anything about them on a second viewing other than the second time I watched it, I did sort of notice like Evangeline. She herself is biracial. Her mother is white, and her father, who seems to not be in the picture anymore, was black. It's unclear. There's like a bunch of people at Evangeline's house, and other than her husband, you don't know how any of them are related to her. It seems like most of them are probably related to her husband, but there's like at one point Madeline asked this little white girl, like, is Evangeline your mom? And the kid doesn't say anything, and the movie doesn't say anything. Like, you have no idea like what is going on there. So I mean, you see a little bit of that dynamic, and maybe that's why Evangeline has taken such an interest in Madeline, because she sort of scratches some kind of itch in her brain about her own circumstances. But like you said, other than kind of more minor connections that probably if you were watching really closely the first time you could have gotten the first time around, it's not like a Gire or La Note or something like that, where every time you watch it you're gonna notice like, oh, it just goes deeper. Like they stacked this thing, there's like a different angle on like almost everything that happens in it, that it's like not even possible to come across the first time, like where your viewing of the movie would be different because you yourself are different, like from one year to another or one decade to another or something like that. I can't imagine that I could have that experience of this movie, but it's a good watch. It's a totally good watch. And, going back to the question of critique, I would say to the extent that there is an implicit critique in this movie, it's that the art that they're making, like, it has to be framed like through the perspective of this mentally ill child to be interesting. It is itself, like, watching it like rather dull and self-indulgent, but the way that it's framed, like with the camera inside of the mask and like, here's what these figures look like to this disturbed person, and like short shots of this and that to sort of capture the sense of like, if you're in the middle of this is the effect that it might have on you if this is the mental state you were in. Like the fact that it requires that framing in order to be interesting and not to just be like this totally noxious thing that the director is making you watch. I mean, I don't know if you would call that like critique, but it's like at least an implicit critique, perhaps.
Yeah, I would say that that aspect was well done. It never really gets like too overwhelming. Like I can imagine like, oh, let's get into the mind of somebody that's like mentally disturbed and was in a psychiatric ward before, as this girl was, and I can imagine it being very kind of ham-fisted, over the top, just colors all over the place, camera angles all over the place, just like too much, and just like not a realistic appraisal of what maybe like mental illness would actually look like, from the inside looking out. So it handles that aspect well. Like again, like the images never get too overwhelming. You never think like there's too much dancing. There's like it's like boring. It's just like watching, right? One aspect that I want to talk about is, so there is like it's not like a major part of the film, but it's big enough that it's worth mentioning. There's a kind of like racial component to some of the stuff that's going on, in the sense that, Evangeline, you notice like early on, she brings out this person that she knows, not exactly sure how she knows him, but he's a guy that was incarcerated for some length of time. Maybe it was like 2 years, maybe it was in fact longer. And later on, she also has this like affection towards this half white actress, half white, half black. And ultimately, when she goes home, you see that she has a home life where she's married to a black man, and it seems like all the people kind of like around there, at least, they seem to be like either his friends and his relatives. And I mean, I wouldn't necessarily fault white people for, hanging around blacks because they're curious or whatever, right? I never want to think like that there's something wrong with like curiosity. But specifically with the character of Evangeline, where we know that she has an exploitative quality, right? Where she's willing to sort of cultivate friendships and relationships based not only on her own curiosity, but maybe what she could get out of certain arrangements, even if, it might be for the greater good. I mean, like, Werner Herzog famously, right, he had, somewhat of a toxic relationship with Klaus Kinski, and maybe you could say that he exploited him. Maybe he, brought out the best with him, however you want to frame it, right? There's always this possibility of, are we doing this for the greater good, right? That's when, the lines of like manipulation or whatever get kind of, iffy. But, in this case, we could also wonder, what exactly are they producing? They're producing a dance play based on the Three Little Pigs, is what it is.
But it's also about prison.
Yeah, but it's also about prison, and now there's like all these other months. Now we're gonna bring, Madeline's, characteristics into it.
Are like, what the fuck are like? What is this thing that we're making? Like we're barely in this anymore. Like it's just Madeline now. Like what are you doing? Like everybody else is like kind of questioning her. Like what is the point of this? And she doesn't know what she's making. Like they go to do this photo shoot, and she's like, I know these are exactly the costumes that we decided upon, but that was when we were doing the prison theme. Now I want everyone just to put back on their regular clothing that they came in with, and we'll do the photo shoot in your regular clothing. And it's just like, I think it's not so much like she seems at ease in her home environment, like it doesn't like she's a lot more normal seeming there than she is when she's like amongst the actors or whatever. I think it's what the film is critiquing is the impulse to like neuroticize it and like exoticize it, and like this sort of endlessly recursive like self-examination, this sort of like self-fascination that she is engaging with, and that seems to sort of be like the impetus for her art or whatever, and then like foisting that on other people and like trying to put them into that same bucket with you, like make them as neurotic and self-obsessed as you are.
I wonder, though, if the racial element was introduced to highlight kind of like more, because, like 2018, I guess it wasn't the peak of this kind of discourse, but I think for a lot of like modern viewers, if you introduce something like, a racial component to these kinds of like more, like non-racialized like forms of manipulation or whatnot, maybe it's going to be like more prominent in some way, but again, it's subtle, and like color is never like really brought out in this kind of like very, very distinct way where it's not ham-fisted or anything. Like if there is a subtle comment going on, it is going to be that subtle comment, right? And I think to the extent that it's there, I think it's well done, and you definitely like you remember like in Nashville there was that what was her name, Pearl. The British woman that was like supposedly working for the BBC, like someone that's like fascinated by a world that she's not actually in. Same thing in Sweet and Lowdown, right? The Woody Allen film. You have a character that's very similar, and I think is probably even based on the Nashville character, where she's fascinated by something that's a little bit rougher. This woman might be in the same kind of category. And maybe, that exploitive streak is being brought out in some way, partly by having that work on you like subtly in the background. So
the racial element, I'm wondering if that was baked into the story from the beginning, or if it emerged from the fact that she ended up casting Helena Howard as the main character, and then this white woman Miranda July as the mother. I mean, was that like something that she wanted from the beginning, or is that something that maybe they talked about and was like, it's something that we're noticing, and so this is something that we have to put in the movie. I think discussing like exactly what was the reason, was it because of the discourse at the time or whatever, is less interesting than just talking about the work itself, which I agree, it's handled well. It's like everybody knows it, but nobody's kind of saying it. There's one line towards the end where the woman who's her assistant / also an actor says like, what about the optics of like you exploiting this like half black teenager's trauma or whatever. And even that's not necessarily like specifically racial. It's also just kind of like, isn't it going to look like we're really doing something pretty fucked up with this teenage girl if we put this on stage, So I don't know that we have necessarily described the movie for people that have not seen it, so probably we don't need to give too much of a synopsis, but just the basic premise of the movie is this young girl, Madeline, she's 16. She lives with her mother and her brother, and she's gotten part of this like pantomime, physical movement-based theater company in New York City, and it slowly emerges that she's had some kind of psychotic breakdown in the past. There's a shot of a wristband from a mental hospital, and her mom's on the phone with the pharmacy or with the doctor, like she's out of her medication. She hasn't been taking it for a week. She's a teenager. What are you going to do? They don't tell you everything. And sort of slowly the experience and the director is trying to make this project about prison, but also with pigs. And is the pigs the cops or the prisoners, or is it the three little pigs? I don't know. But she becomes fixated on Madeline as an object of her obsession, starts making the play more and more about Madeline's slightly fucked up relationship with her mother. And then eventually there's a breaking point reached with the actors where they rebel against her towards the end of the movie. They kick her out, and they basically like stage whatever it is that she thinks that she's making, and it's sort of supposed to be triumphant. But I do want to talk about the ending, because I think my interpretation of it was slightly different than yours, because the ending of the movie is not that. The ending of the movie is a shot of Madeline walking alone towards the 7 train somewhere in, I don't know, where is that, Harlem or the Bronx? I don't know where the 7 train goes. I think it's the 7 train.
It has to be Queens.
I don't know where it is, but but she is walking alone, and the audio cuts back in, and you realize that this performance that was supposedly happening, that she was taking part in, none of that audio is there. You hear honking, you hear brakes, you hear all the kind of typical noises that you hear of New York City, but you don't hear this, crowd of people clapping and chanting and blah, blah. So she's walking alone towards this train. My read of the ending is that is sort of her psychological projection of what she wishes would happen. Is that like after I don't know at what point the reality breaks down exactly, if that whole ending scene is just a complete fabrication, or if it's like after she kind of humiliates her mother by giving a performance where she is basically playing her mother, like in a moment where she has both been berating Madeline but then gets like abused by Madeline in return, and the mother walks out of the room in tears. I don't know if that's where it breaks down or if the whole thing is like a fantasy, but I think that the whole idea you're talking about of the reconciliation and the slate wiped clean and the actors having this spontaneous realization like, oh, this is really fucked up, like Evangeline shouldn't do this. This is just a kid who's troubled, So because Evangeline couldn't have been out of the house for more than like 20 minutes. And somehow they put together this whole thing with lighting, like precisely timed lighting. There's a giant fan. Like, why would that be in the house already? So I think that the whole thing is like Madeline imagining like her best case scenario for how this could go, that like everybody simultaneously realizes, what, this is really fucked up. Let's not do this anymore, because something in her realized that she was going in a bad direction, because she tries to extricate herself from the play, and Evangeline's just like, oh, sure. But then in the next scene, like Evangeline's calling her house like, hey, we missed you at rehearsal today. So like clearly she didn't take it seriously, or like talked her back into it, or whatever. So like this is her fantasy, but then at the end it's just her like in a trance state, like completely inside of her own head, just walking towards a subway station. And to me, this mirrors both a scene earlier in the movie where she is clearly having like somewhat of a break because she's been off of her medication, where she like starts going up to people with the pig mask and going like, oh, good, making these like, piggy kind of noises and behaviors. But we also see right before that, you see a homeless man like having like, for lack of a better phrase, like a Jordan Neely kind of moment, like in some ways, I think this is kind of like the early years of Jordan Neely kind of movie is almost how I would phrase it. 'Cause you see like what she has the potential to become you know, like right in that moment where you see this guy, he's just like, you know, ragged clothing, completely in his own world, like in public, having an argument with nobody, you know, in his own head. And at least to me, I think that's what that ending is like signaling, is like her walking towards that kind of like pretty dark and bereft future, you know, is that moment of, you know, that like she like the world in which things go right for her and everybody recognizes, you know, that she's troubled and tries to help her is something that is only going to exist in her fantasy ultimately. So that was my read on it. I don't know if you had similar thoughts.
Well, the reason why I don't necessarily have the same kind of, you know, she's darkly going into some kind of grim future is, well, first of all, the whole kind of dance scene. I mean, some of that already does happen in the film. Specifically for like the character arc, we have like an earlier, it's a pretty quick scene in the car with Regina and Madeline, and they're sitting and there seems to be some sort of symbolic reconciliation where they're gripping each other's hands, and it seems like as if like something has been put behind them, and maybe there's something else happening in the future. Couple that with the fact that these actors, assuming that's not just all psychological projection on Madeline's part, it seems like these actors are sort of taking her side. At the very least, like even if it is psychological projection, she must be understanding that she's not in a kind of like proper, like appropriate relationship with this older woman. And she might be able to act on this knowledge now after the fact. I mean, there's like other scenes like to get back to the goon cave. It seems to me also very kind of like unrealistic. Like, why would you have, assuming that this is a father that has like left them, and maybe he left them, you know, for good reasons. Maybe he's just too psychologically fucked up. And she's like, you know what? I'm going to keep the basement as is. I'm going to keep...
Yeah, that felt ham-fisted. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, I'm going to keep the basement as is as like a reminder. I'm going to keep literally...
I'm going to keep all his porn tapes like right out where my kids can see them. I'm going to leave all his pictures of naked white women on the walls.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, given that was happening, then you see like other characters, like the other kids, like, oh, you know, like we should go into your basement. Like I bet there's like, you know, like dead bodies in there, because like everybody knows, and maybe she knows herself, like I'm not supposed to be down there. So it's weird that that's there, and that seems to be also this like ad hoc kind of way of establishing some sort of depth and some kind of history and some kind of like, you know, narrative arc that isn't quite maybe there, that's not really justified by what we see on the screen. So, I mean, I just took the ending to be a little bit more of the same, that this like, you know, very kind of, you know, woo-woo dancing troupe, they spontaneously put together this thing after coming to this realization that this is not a proper relationship, and they're going to save her by essentially making the director a target. And granted, like, yeah, you could do the psychological reading as well, but even like if you do like some of that kind of, you know, symbolism inherent within it, like they're all coming out and it's like the light is on them, and we just saw the scene right before where Regina seems to have a turnover, a new leaf with her daughter. So it's hard for me to like totally escape the idea of here they are basking in this like cleansing light, and she's at the same time walking away from that. Maybe she's going to give up, maybe not acting, but this kind of acting, this kind of troupe. Maybe this is too psychologically taxing, right? So, I mean, like putting all these things together, you know, you could make, I think, some of the arguments that you're making. At the same time, you could make some of these other arguments too, which is not, you know, like you don't want to have so much room open that you could make an argument for like this is cliche, you know.
It's certainly not. It is certainly not unambiguously the more charitable interpretation of the ending. Like there's openness. I mean, to me, the second time I watched it, I didn't notice the first time that like she starts dropping in like what is the actual like diegetic sound or whatever like of the scene, and it doesn't include the sound of the theater troupe. So I mean, that's kind of why I came to that conclusion. But I get what you're saying, and like ultimately like. I would say that my interpretation like makes it a better ending than if it's the interpretation that you gave. But it's not like a fantastic ending either. You know, it's like it's a good solid ending, but it's not greatly depthful. It's just like it's sort of a clever way of wrapping it up, but maybe it even is a combination of the two. Like maybe it's like the whole thing really does happen, but then at the end she becomes distracted and goes into her own little world and starts walking towards the train or whatever. Like even this defense of her or whatever is like not enough to save her, to keep her off of the path, or a bad path towards total consumption by her mental illness and homelessness and other sorts of things that can happen. The relationship with the mother is really odd in the movie. Like it was the one thing I would say. Miranda July is not a director that I'm a fan of. Like the stuff of hers that I've seen is like nauseatingly like quirky and bad, but they did give the funny meme of pooping back and forth, but that was her. She from her movie You and Me and Everyone We Know, I think. But her acting in this is like pretty good, but I just could never quite fit, because on the one hand she sort of seems like a good mom in some scenes, but then she's like too chummy with her at times, like they're sitting in the park and they're talking, and it's less like, it's almost more like an older sister or like an older friend talking to her rather than like her mom or whatever. She tries to give her the sex talk in the car and it's like completely awkward and she doesn't know how to do it. And then other times she like Madeline starts acting out like that she gets really angry and snaps at her when she doesn't eat. That's another aspect of the movie, is like Madeline doesn't, She drinks booze occasionally, but I don't think she eats anything in the movie because she seems to have sort of an eating disorder.
Yeah, she gets a nice subtle detail at the beginning is she's being fed forkfuls of rice. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Like she's not actually doing it herself. It's the mother taking a forkful of rice and bringing it over into her mouth, and she's just reluctantly eating it.
Yeah. No, so I wasn't... That was the one aspect of the movie that I couldn't quite get a handle on what it was even going for, let alone like what it actually was, because it seemed like what it was sort of saying was maybe she didn't know how to deal with her in the context of the mental illness, like should I be harsh and enforce like strictures on her so that she can't fall out, or should I be really gentle so she doesn't get too stressed and have a break from that reason? Should I be more like a friend? Should I be more like an authority figure? Like she sort of doesn't have it figured out, and so it's like the worst of both worlds. That's certainly a lesson of history, is you either got to be gentle or you got to be firm, but you can't do both because you won't have either. That's what happened to Louis the XVI that got killed in the French Revolution. He sometimes tried to crack down really hard, and other times he was extremely lenient, and in the end he ended up getting his head cut off. So it's a lesson for life too. If you're gonna whatever course you take, actually take that course. Don't half-ass it.
One thing I want to talk about is just like two different aspects, or like two different scenes that are handled well and then poorly in the film. Is so somewhere at the beginning where Madeline she's with her dance troupe and they end up mooning Evangeline, and they all just kind of like run out laughing. And she runs in, and Madeline runs into her mom's car, and then she's like, duck, duck, and drive, go, 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 go. And the mother seems to like be very, very nervous at this, like, because she thinks something bad is happening. And Madeline, she's just kind of playing around, right? And the mother can't really catch up to the idea that, no, this isn't one of those bad things that she's experiencing. It's actually, something, I guess like somewhat positive and fun and light that's happening in her life. And she says something like, I thought something had happened, like your friends make fun of you. And then she says, no, that's only at school. So there seems to be, one of the reasons why it seems like she maybe took up acting is she maybe doesn't really easily fit in like a typical school environment. But if she has this like after school thing that she does where she could really excel at, it gives her like a sense of purpose, a sense of worth. So she just goes in that direction. And that, it was a very tense scene, right? Especially since it just came from something that was like, I guess from their perspective, like funny and light. and immediately kind of like going into a totally different direction. I thought that was very, very well done, and it captured, before like you even know that much about either of the characters, it captures like a dynamic very well. You know, if you think about like a film, right, you only get X number of minutes, right, to show character development and whatnot. This would be a slice, I think, that would be very kind of classic, right? I think it's an excellent scene. Later on, you see a car scene with Evangeline and Madeline, and that's basically where they make the decision that, you know, maybe this relationship that we have going on is actually not good for either of us. And as they make that decision, suddenly the car runs over, seems like some kind of animal, and they're like, oh, should we stop? And then she's like, no, it's dead, let's keep going. And that's like very ham-fisted symbolism, I think, right? It's very obvious what just transpired, like whatever, because also like in that scene, it seems like up until that scene, Madeline also saw her not only as a parental figure, but also as, you know, very kind of powerful, you know, adult, whereas here it's like, well, I already just, you know, almost got her husband to like possibly kiss me or something, and maybe something bad would have happened if she wouldn't have showed up. Now she sees her like almost like a little bit like a peer, and, you know, throwing the animal in there, no, let's keep going, you know, very kind of like very obvious kind of symbolism, does not have the subtlety that the previous scene that I just described has, despite the fact that in both cases, you know, we're talking about some sort of either parental or domestic type of thing, and just character arcs for both.
Yeah, I agree. The whole thing with because I think because they don't know what they hit. She goes like, was that an animal? Is it a cat? But implying like, oh, like it could have been a person, you know, like we should probably go see exactly what happened, and she just drives away like a hit and run. And it's like, but, you know, it doesn't, and she looks really nervous, like fuck, what did I do? You know, so and what's funny is the scene like wasn't that, like the scene would have been better without it. Like it wasn't a terrible scene, you know, it wasn't as good as the earlier scene you were talking about, and it's a little like, I mean, it's the problem with a script that's like made by actors, you know, is there are certain subtleties that I think you can only think of in the writer's room that don't, because I'm thinking like when she says, you know, oh, maybe I shouldn't be, you know, in your play anymore. And she's like, oh, you know, maybe you're right, Madeline, you know, this dynamic we have, it's just not that healthy. You know, it's like, I mean, that's fine. That's perfectly serviceable dialogue. But like, there are like subtleties of like Evangeline's character that you could bring out with like a more considered dialogue, you know, like some like, you know, is like some sort of like manipulation, or, you know, something about like something behind the facade, like an anger that comes out or something like that, you know, that you don't really see from her at any point in the movie. So there's certain things that like there's kind of a ceiling on on this movie, I think, because of the way that it was made. I mean, I don't exactly want to say that because Days of Heaven was sort of made in a similar way, and it's one of the best movies ever made. But, you know, not everybody's Terrence Malick either. So I mean, he had a lot more money to shoot a lot more footage to cull from too. So it gives him, he had a bigger well to draw from when he was selecting the most poetic things to include from, say, like the child's narration in that movie. But I mean, the only scene we really didn't talk about is when Madeline starts coming on to Evangeline's black husband, or I don't even know if that's the right phrase. Like she starts getting weirdly and unnecessarily sexual with him. Like, I'm turned 17 on set. Yeah, it's but I don't. It's like, is she just like trying to fuck with him, or does she actually want him to? Is she trying to poison the well with Evangeline so that she gets kicked out? Like, exactly what the motivation is, I think, is not like they don't ever quite zero in on it, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it sort of sits awkwardly in the movie where nothing quite comes of it. Like, it just happens. I don't know about you. I feel like that's about all I have to say about the movie. I mean, it's like we went on a pretty long time actually for a movie that's like not that depthful, but it's pretty good, and it's like it's pretty sustainedly good. Like there's only a couple parts I would say are like weaker or that kind of ruin the flow of it. I definitely recommend it. It's what do you think about Criterion as like a streaming service? Because it's interesting to me, like now it's getting movies that are not part of the Criterion Collection proper.
Yeah,
it's like a venue for.
It's a movie, the Donbass film was like, I know this is the Criterion. Like, where does this come from, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I think they are showcasing things that are. Like, it's different from the shit you see on Netflix. And movie, right? So, I'm glad that it exists.
Yeah, well, I just hope, because I know I was talking to a friend of the channel, Jessica, recently, and she was talking about how they had all these, like, 70s slasher movies on it, or they have, or like even from the 90s, like they have I Know What You Did Last Summer on there right now. And Criterion's been known to like pick a commercial thing once in a while so they can make a lot of money off of it, like Armageddon or shit like that. So I mean, I hope that this, like I hope they stay primarily like a streaming venue for like more like artsy or independent kind of stuff, and that this doesn't metastasize into like, because especially Netflix is like real shaky these days. So I hope it doesn't just become like another streaming service, because like Criterion can't catch a break, man. Like they were on Netflix and then they got brought over to, what was it, Hulu for a while, and then it was Filmstuck. And now they've got their own streaming service, Filmstruck, whatever it was, and now they have their own streaming service. But slowly, there's like non-Criterion stuff creeping in. I hope it doesn't. It's like a weird cycle. Like there's not enough of a market for it. I guess I don't know.
Like, I can't imagine. Like, is it really like they can't make? How do you not make money off of like the Criterion?
Well,
catalog?
I think the money's all in the DVDs. You know, like there's. That's one challenge of the arts going forward, is the money that sustains it is mostly contained in the physical media. Like nobody has figured out a good way to do streaming that adequately compensates everybody so that nobody gets pissed off. Spotify, the artists are always complaining about how low the residuals are. We see the SAG-AFTRA strike now. Streaming is a big part of the dispute that they're having with the studios, because the model for residuals did not factor streaming into account when it was last decided, or didn't decide it. It wasn't as big as it is now, so it wasn't adequately decided in favor of the actors. So you know, even I don't know. I would imagine Kindle must still make money, because you still have to pay per title instead of. But even then, there's Kindle Unlimited. I mean, that might fuck up the business model. I don't know. Anyway, that was Madeline's Madeline. I don't know if you have anything else to say. I guess you got to do your advertising at the end here.
Well, I mean,
I just realized we did not take a break like we said we were going to last time at any point in this, and I hope the audio is not corrupted like it has been multiple times.
That's another thing. I just got one of those Zoom tracks with multiple XLR inputs. Also got a second mic like this, and we're going to be taking that to Minneapolis. I was going to test it before by doing it here, but I didn't get around to it. And plus, like the additional microphone heads, they have not finished drying since last night. I was like, all right, whatever. But I mean, last thing that I would say is the film is good enough that I would be interested in seeing what else she has done. I will say that I did read a couple of plot synopses for some other films that she did, and it seemed kind of bad. And like, because that's the thing, like watching a movie like this, like I can, I would very much urge anybody that's like very kind of artsy and is into dance and think like, well, what kind of movie can be made about this that's actually good? If you ever had that question, it's useful to look at a movie like this, right? Because it would answer some of those questions. At the same time, I could totally see her going in the wrong kind of direction easily.
Actually, I lied. That is the one last thing I thought, is if this was like the debut movie of somebody, I think you'd be like, holy shit, this is a brilliant new voice. Like the first time you saw Hunger by Steve McQueen, like, holy moly, I can't believe that's somebody's first movie. First feature-length movie, I should say. The fact that this is like the 5th or 6th or 7th movie that she's made or something like that, and it's the first one that has filtered into my awareness at all, and I think currently the only one that's on Criterion, if I'm not mistaken. It in context, it feels kind of like effervescent, like it just was a happy accident that it turned out so good. I hope she has other good stuff, but I could totally see this being like the one, like the peak of like the career of a lesser artist kind of movie.
Yeah, so I mean, it's something to consider. We need to go back to that director who did Fish Tank, because she has some other things in between that I think would be worth pursuing. and doing some of these shows on. So anyway, we're going to take a little break now and do a walk and talk, and some of that will be public, some of that will be behind a paywall for the patrons. And thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you soon.